New York Giants general manager Joe Schoen breaks his silence about the team's disappointing 2023 season. I've got some takeaways plus some thoughts about where the Giants go from here. That's coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Trainer, P-Train, and thank you to everybody who's tuning in, my everydayers, my first-timers, my Blue Crew subtext community members, and everybody in between. Love you guys. Appreciate you. You can follow me on X, the site formerly known as Twitter, at Patricia_Trainer. And, of course, you can also follow me on Instagram at Patty Trainer, PATTITRAINA. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, Joe Schoen, the general manager of the New York Giants, spoke to the media. And he talked for roughly a half an hour. A lot of good stuff, I thought, covered a wide range of topics. So I have the key takeaways from that presser, but I'm not just going to reiterate what he said. I'm going to kind of give you my take on things, what makes sense, my overall impressions, that sort of thing. So we've got a lot to cover on the podcast. Again, thank you for tuning in for the Locked On Giants podcast. Let's get right into it. The key one of the biggest key takeaways, I think, of Joe Schoen's presser was about the quarterback situation. Now, Joe Schoen, right off the bat, in his opening statement, said that, Daniel Jones had the successful ACL surgery, and he declined to say whether, the doctors, when they got into the knee, found anything further in the knee as far as, other damage and whatnot. But Schoen basically said that once Daniel Jones is healthy, he is going to be the starting quarterback of the team. Now, a lot of people, I know when I tweeted that out, the first thing was, why? There was a lot of people who were like, why is he saying that now? How can he know for sure? What does this mean for the draft? What does this mean for free agency? What does this mean, period, for the quarterback position of this franchise? All right, let's try and make some sense out of it. Daniel Jones, as I record this, is about a week out from ACL surgery. His timeline for recovery is going to be anywhere between 8 and 10 months. All right. And even then, he's still going to probably need additional time to recover because, you look at other guys who have had ACL surgeries and it could take them almost 2 years to fully come back and be what they were prior to the injury. So just because Schoen is saying right now that the expectation is that Daniel Jones is going to be the starter does not necessarily mean that's how it's going to be. They don't know how the rehab is going to go. They don't know, what setbacks, if any, he might have. All right. It makes sense to say this now because you want to be positive. You also want to give, Jones, one less thing to worry about right now. As far, as he begins this long journey back with his rehab. There's also financials involved. I've said many times that Daniel Jones will be on this roster regardless of what they do at quarterback because the Giants, to cut him now, the Giants would take a huge cap hit, one that would basically wipe out whatever cap space they have and then some, and they're not going to do that. Jones is going to be on this roster. Now, whether they tweak his cap number, that remains to be seen. I personally wouldn't touch it, but, we'll see if they do that or not. I got the impression that Shane's not sure what the future holds, and rightfully so. You don't know if Daniel Jones is going to be ready to go. So Schoen left himself with an out. He was asked about, the quarterback position and basically, okay, if the expectation is Daniel's going to be your starter, does that mean you're not going to draft a quarterback? And that's not necessarily going to be the case. Shane talked about, scouting, the scouting work that he's done. And by the way, this was an interesting nugget that I did not know about. We've been reading every weekend about how Shane is in attendance at this game or that game. And he said that his staff basically identifies, like the top 25 to 50 players that he has to see. And what they do is they try and group them into schools, and they coincide with where the Giants happen to be playing that particular weekend. So, for example, if they're out in San Francisco, maybe he swings down to USC if they're playing a home game. So that's kind of how that works. But getting back to the quarterback situation, Shane did not rule out drafting a quarterback. Now, would that come in round 1? Would that come later in the draft? That's all going to depend on where the Giants end up drafting and who's on the board. A lot of people I know are besides themselves because they envisioned, Caleb Williams or Drake May as the next Giants franchise quarterback. And, to get a chance for those guys, you're going to probably need to be drafting in the top 3. Right now, I believe the Giants are drafting 6th overall. And of course, there's 5 more games left to play before we know what the final draft order is, at least at the top of the draft order. So Shane did say, and I've been saying this all along as well, that they are going to have to address the quarterback situation because right now, Tommy DeVito is the only healthy quarterback that they have under contract for 2024. All right. So Jones is under contract, but again, they don't know if he's going to be ready to start training camp or the season. They'll have a better idea where they're at during draft time. So, during free agency, before the start of free agency. So that's going to certainly give us a big clue where Daniel Jones is in his rehab. And I also got the impression that they're going to move on from Tyrod Taylor after this year. Tyrod's been a good addition to the team, but he's had rotten luck with injuries. So I think they're going to move on from him after this year. And I said on past shows, my everydayers will probably remember this, that I believe Tommy DeVito is not a QB1. He could potentially be a QB2, depending on what the Giants do. If they draft a rookie, I think by default, DeVito would be a QB2 if Jones is ready. And then if that rookie happens to be a first rounder, you'll have competition. Brian Dable's going to have competition regardless. So where a guy's drafted doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be the starter or the backup or whatever. So a lot of stuff still to be determined. Now, here's an interesting thing, sticking with the Daniel Jones storyline for a moment here. Shane was asked, why do you believe so much in Daniel Jones? I mean, I think we can all agree that Daniel Jones this year regressed. He took some steps backwards. His internal clock got messed up. He looked skittish in the pocket. The offensive line didn't look good in front of him. So Shane was asked, why do you still believe in Daniel Jones? And he went back to last year. He said he won 10 games, a road playoff game, and then this past year's preseason. The one series, by the way, in which the starting offense looked really good against a not so good Carolina Panthers team. Now, I have to confess, there were a lot of times I thought Shane was hanging his hat on things of the past. And a little later on, I'll talk about Evan Neal. And that was another instance where he talked about the past. People change, people develop, or they don't develop, and sometimes they regress. So for me, to hang your hat on the fact that Daniel Jones won 10 games, and if I'm not mistaken, I don't think any of those games, 9 games in the regular season. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think any of those 9 games came against a really good team. I'll have to go back and check that, but I don't think those teams, really were good, like powerhouse type teams. The road playoff game, the Vikings, some said that the Vikings were one of the worst playoff teams in the tournament last year. And, that's up for debate, but I'm going to do a deeper dive on that for Giants Country. I'm going to take a look at Daniel Jones's past last year versus this year in the system and just kind of see where he's regressed. Cause I do think he's regressed, and just, to hang your hat on last year. And, Shane even made the comment, when we get to the offensive line, he said, Well, we basically won with that offensive line, save for, the fact that we didn't have John Michael Schmitz and that the offensive line was, serviceable. I just felt like there were a lot of excuses being made, and I'm not sure I buy all of them, to be honest with you, but I've got to do some more research on that, do some more homework, and I'll probably have something up for you on Giants Country about this very same topic because, quite honestly, the reasons why they still believe in Daniel Jones and the whole logic behind it, I wasn't buying it. I think, it's a matter of just saying it right now. They're not going to say we're moving on from Daniel Jones right now. What good would that do? I mean, it would demoralize the young man's rehab. What good would that do to say that? So that's my takeaway on Daniel Jones and the quarterback situation. Again, I do believe the Giants are going to address it. They're going to have to. I don't think Matt Barkley's going to be the answer. I don't think Eason, who's also on the practice squad, is going to be the answer. Like I said, I don't think Tyrod Taylor is going to be back. So it's going to be Jones, DeVito, and to be determined. And again, keep an eye on what the Giants do around free agency because that's going to give us a big clue as to where Daniel Jones is in his rehab. And they're optimistic that he'll attack it and be ready to roll sooner than later. All right, coming up next, I'm going to talk about a question that I put to Joe about the roster. Don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, if you want to secure tickets to your favorite concerts, shows, and sporting events without the stress, you need to check out GameTime, the fast and easy way to buy tickets right up until the day of the event. With amazing deals on last-minute tickets and their best prices guaranteed, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're going to have. With GameTime, you're not only getting the lowest prices, you're also getting clear images of the seat views and event cancellation protection. And if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, GameTime will credit you for 110% of the difference. So go ahead and snag the tickets without the stress with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Terms apply. Again, that promo code is LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase at GameTime. Hey, Giant fans, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you every day, all day, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Trainer, P-Train, and still to come on the Locked On Giants podcast, we're going to continue our look at the key takeaways from Joe Schoen's press conference that he held on Monday. But just because the Giants are on the bye week doesn't mean that the Locked On Giants podcast is on the bye week. So I have pre-recorded shows for you for the rest of the week. Tomorrow, Wednesday show is going to be our draft show. We're going to take an early look at the draft class with special guest Emery Hunt. Thursday and Friday, I have actually a two-part interview with former NFL assistant coach Pratik Patel. Pratik used to be on the Giants staff. So we're going to talk about the injury situation, what recommendations, what he has seen, how are the Giants structured. Right now I think there's some misconceptions about things. And Joe Schoen was actually asked about injuries. And, while I'm on the topic of that, just real quick, he said if it was one type of injury, they could maybe hone in and see if there was something they could do differently. To me, one type of injury that you could loop all together are the soft tissue issues, say that 10 times fast. But we'll talk about that obviously with Pratik. It's a two-part interview. It starts Thursday, goes Friday. Then next Monday, coming off the bye, I have my annual airing of grievances, a Seinfeld type episode, Festivus for the rest of us. So I'm going to outline everything that I think the Giants maybe could have done better this year in getting ready for this season. So that's what's coming up on the Locked On Giants podcast. let's get back to Joe Schoen and the key takeaways and what he had to say. And I had a question, because this is one of my grievances, spoiler alert. And my question to Joe was about the roster construction and if he had any regrets. And specifically, when I asked the question, I was thinking about how it just seemed like certain positions got a little bit more love than some others, specifically the slot receiver position, where they had, a dozen or so slot receivers, and they didn't allocate any resources really to a backup offensive tackle. They didn't really get an edge rusher. They tried to get Boogie Basham, and he, of course, was inactive this past week. So I asked Shane, I said, do you have any regrets about how you put the roster together? And, from that, there came questions about the kickoff and punt return, or why they didn't keep somebody who was better suited for the role rather than jamming Eric Gray, a rookie who had never really done it before, into that role. And Shane basically, in a nutshell, said that he didn't really have regrets, but he kept saying, look, you can't build up a roster in one offseason, which is correct. You can't. But when you start allocating, to one position, and again, I go back to the slot receiver, how they just loaded up on slot receivers. You mean to tell me they couldn't take, some of the contracts that they devoted to those slot receivers and devote something to, say, a backup offensive tackle who could have competed for the swing tackle spot? That they couldn't have maybe taken some of that money and gotten an extra edge rusher, or an extra tight end or whatever? That's where I kind of have an issue with what Shane is saying. You're never going to address all your issues. I get that. But you do have to be judicious. It kind of reminds me of when I was younger, and I would pull out of my closet 5 or 6 different outfits, and I wasn't sure what I was going to wear. And my father could never understand it. He'd be like, you only have one body. He says, just pick one and roll with it. And the Giants, in stacking up on slot receivers, they were trying to build up the arsenal for Daniel Jones. I get that, but not really, to me, at least, it didn't look like they had a plan. And it was just money and resources that could have gone elsewhere. So although Shane said he had no regrets, and he kept pointing out that, hey, we're about 22 months in now. Okay, I get that. But the roster needs to progress forward. And, they've progressed in some areas. They've also gone backwards in some areas. And they've got holes that they're going to have to fill. So I disagree. I don't think that they did as good of a job building up the roster this year or this past offseason as they did the prior offseason when they had limited resources. But, my opinion doesn't matter. It's what, obviously they think in 1925 Giants drive, and that's fine. But look, you got to be more judicious with what you get. And I think that's a lesson to be learned moving forward for them. So we'll see how they go about it. But I think the other thing, the other point is you can't bring guys in with the intention of jamming square pegs into round holes. And I mentioned Eric Gray as being, the ideal example here, the poster child, if you will. And, Shane said, yeah, I know we had Jamison Crowder and he looks good down in Washington. You can't force a guy into a role that he's not suited for. And by trying to do that with Eric Gray, the Giants, I think, hurt themselves with that. Not to mention, did they create confidence issues in the young man? So just the whole building of that roster, to me, it wasn't really done as well as it should have been, in my opinion. Now, injuries notwithstanding, nobody anticipated the injury bug would wipe out this team in areas on the offensive line or, this spot or that spot. But you got to plan for that. And again, I know you can't fill every single spot. I get that. But what you're doing now is you're creating a vicious cycle where, okay, you've just filled your running back spot, But now, because we couldn't devote resources to outside linebacker, we're going to have holes because guys are going to leave via free agency. Their contracts are coming up or whatever. Just it's always nonstop. There's always turnover, always something new. And building a core and keeping that core has become so hard to do. And I just don't think, this past year they did a good job with that. But we'll see. We'll see what Joe Schoen does in year number 3. But they've been on the job now, as he said, 22 months. The first few months, you give them a pass because they were getting everything organized. But you want to start to see progress. Look, if we're going to say that a draft class needs 3 years to show growth and progress, we're going to say the same thing for a front office regime. So next year is going to be a very big one for Joe Schoen in terms of how he puts that roster together. And if they finally can close the talent gap between Dallas and the Philadelphia Eagles, something that we thought maybe they had done with as far as Dallas was concerned. But as it turns out, they did not. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk offensive line because that's a hot topic. So don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 MONEYLINE bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and score big this NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, everybody, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm Patricia Trainer, P-Train, your host. And again, thank you for tuning in to the program. We're running down key takeaways from General Manager Joe Schoen and what they potentially mean going forward. And I saved the best for last, at least what I consider to be the best for last, the offensive line. Now, every year for as long as I can remember, people have been screaming, rightfully so, about the offensive line. And someone who I really respect in the business, who is a good football mind, told me that ideally, when it comes to an offensive line, you have 3 studs on your line, and you can get by with 3 studs, and the other 2 guys being, graders or road graders or decent enough. Now, when you look at the current projected starting offensive line, the line that the Giants were supposed to start with, the only stud they really had was left tackle Andrew Thomas, who got hurt. Evan Neal, he really didn't develop the way they maybe hoped he would. And then, of course, he dealt with injuries. Then you look at center. John Michael Schmitz has played well as a rookie, did miss 3 games with a shoulder injury. He has potential to be a stud. The guards, I don't know what they're doing at guards. I mean, everybody wanted Justin Pugh to come back, and he came back, and he's a great locker room presence, but I don't think he's the future, folks. I don't know that he'll be back next year. I don't think Mark Lewinsky will be back next year. Ben Bredesen, I believe, is a free agent. I think he could potentially be back, given that he offers depth at guard and center. But, Marcus McKethan didn't work out. They tried him at right guard, and he ultimately got benched. Joshua Azudu was inconsistent. So, Shane Lemieux, on injured reserve again, he's not coming back. Tyree Phillips, as a backup swing tackle, decent, but, they could probably upgrade that spot. And then Matthew Parrott, who I think they move on from. So the offensive line depth, just from top to bottom, not really good. I mean, I'm not telling you guys anything you don't already know. The offensive line depth is just not very good. They don't have 3 studs. You can make a case that they maybe have the 2 if Schmitz continues to develop. I just feel like they took gambles, and it didn't help them that they were playing, musical chairs in the summertime with the positionless offensive line. I understand what they were trying to get at, but at the same time, when you have young guys and you're moving them around like crazy, they don't really get a chance to settle in and develop continuity with each other and a comfort level at a position. So I just feel like the entire way that they handled the offensive line this past year, not good. And I'll get into that more in my airing of grievances show. But Shane quoted a few stats. He said they've had 9 different starting O-line combinations, second most in 15 years, 21 different combinations total, fourth most in 15 years. That's injuries, and that's coaching and player development, plain and simple. Now, one of the guys that he was asked about was Evan Neal. And he talked about Evan Neal is still an offensive tackle. The question was, is Evan Neal maybe going to be moved inside to guard next year? And Shane indicated that they still like him at tackle. Why, we don't know. Well, he was asked, why do you still like him at tackle? And he goes, I went back and I looked at his Alabama tape. And again, I mentioned this with the Daniel Jones segment. He went back and he looked at past stuff, and past tape is a decent indicator of what you might be getting. And Neal, of course, at Alabama played higher level competition, but it's not the be all end all, nor should you hang your hat on it, because things change. The competition takes a step up. And as good of a program as Alabama is, does Alabama have every single player that hits their roster make the NFL? Mm-mm. So it comes down to the individual, his skill set, and what he's a good fit for. And I don't know, maybe the plan down the line is, maybe Shane's just saying that now again because Neal is hurt and he's trying to get back and he doesn't want to, dent the kid's confidence. That could be it. But maybe the plan down the line is, all right, maybe we look to move him in the spring next year and see how he does. Get him that versatility. Maybe we plug in a veteran at right tackle, or we draft a kid at right tackle to replace him. Whatever the case might be, I think, the Giants and Joe Schoen in talking to the media on Monday, we're talking about the present. As far as like the long-term future, I'm not so sure that they have answers. I think they're going to take it as it comes. So that's the offensive line. And then real quick, Shane expressed hope that he will be able to get something done with Saquon Barkley. So we'll see if that happens, if Saquon and the Giants can come to a long-term deal. I think they have a better chance of that actually this year happening than, they did last year. Last year, I got to admit, I had my doubts when nothing was getting done early on. So we'll see how that happens. And as far as the other free agents that are pending, Shane didn't want to get into that, but we'll cover that as we get to, when we get to the end of the season. I'll do a whole show on that, who stays, who goes, and whatnot. I have some thoughts on that. So that's pretty much it, folks. That is all the takeaways from the Joe Schoen presser, the stuff that I found to be really, worth talking about. Let me know what you think about what Shane had to say. The press conference I know is on YouTube if you want to see it. I know the Giants posted it. I'm curious to hear what some of you guys think about the topics and whatnot, and where the Giants are potentially headed with this franchise. So thank you, as always, for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day, or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. We'll be back tomorrow with Emery Hunt and our draft show. So please don't miss it. Until then, have a great one.